everybody else involved in this. And that's what this committee is determined to do, and do quickly, and move on. And I'm yours, and Senator Simon, you want to speak now, and we'll yield to you, but it is, we will be talking to both of you, of course, because both of you have an intimate knowledge of how these markets work, and you have talked with all of us. I want to emphasize to all senators that whatever we heard in our town meetings back home, in the Dakotas, Nebraska, Missouri, Vermont, or anywhere else, this year, when this was a front page item, whatever we heard there is nothing compared to what we will hear, and rightly so, if we assume they can simply be business as usual. Senator Simon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I simply want to underscore everything my colleague has said. I agree with him. No one is suggesting that there should just be business as usual. And it is not only the question for this committee, are you avoiding it? I think the question is, are the people who are going to be witnesses here, Cash Mallman, who is the chairman of the Chicago Board of Trade, Leo Malamed, who's the chairman of the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, have they just sat back and said, is it going to be business as usual? They've had quite the contrary. They are people, and my colleague and I have worked with them for some time. Some of you have. They're people of integrity who have said immediately when problems arose, we have to move on this, and we have to move vigorously. And they did. Again, I would just underscore, I hope the committee isn't so eager just to do something that we do the wrong thing. I think that's the other thing that you have to be careful about. We have to protect farmers in North Dakota and Nebraska and South Dakota and Missouri and Vermont. I don't know how many grain farmers in Vermont, but
both of them are watching with great interest.
But I think we have to be careful. We have to move with some prudence, and I would simply urge the committee to work with the exchanges and with others who are in positions of responsibility so that we emerge with something that is tighter, that does protect the public better, but that also doesn't shift the markets to Tokyo, London, and elsewhere. I think that is the danger. Finding that balance, I would urge you to be very, very careful in that. As Senator Dixon has said, there's 100 to 110,000 jobs in our state. It's a lot of jobs, but more than that, it's what happens in North Dakota, the price of wheat and soybeans. It's protecting farmers. It's protecting billions of dollars that are going to flow away from this country if we don't do the job properly. And if I could just steal a line also from Senator Eagleton here, when he said it is the personnel, and we have to be careful if we're unhappy with certain personnel that we don't overreact with legislation and ultimately do harm. I think there is a danger in that here. I have nothing further to say, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
But I know after you read Senator Dixon's remarks, you will be fully persuaded as to our position.
Thank you very much, Senator Simon, Senator Dixon. As I said, you've spent time, I know, with each member, and I also know that both of you are supposed to be in other committees, and I appreciate you taking all this time to come over here, and good to see you both. Thank you.
Thank the chair and the committee.
I would, I'm sorry, did anybody want to ask? I'm sorry. Chairman Graham, if you'd like to join us up here. Madam Chair, go
Mr.
ahead.
Chairman, let me introduce the members of my staff that I have with me at my table here. To my left is Don Tendick, who is our acting executive director, knows our budget back and forward. John Milkey is our director of surveillance. And we have here on my right Alan Seifert, deputy director in Division of Trading and Markets, and Pat Nicolette, who's our deputy general counsel. Both Pat Nicolette and Alan Seifert have provided committee staff with technical help on the bill and probably know this bill quite well. Before I start, I'd like to take just a minute to report on the volatile market activity that occurred in stock index futures in the stock market last Friday and then through the morning hour on October 16th, Monday, including the Sunday evening trading and T-bond futures market at the Chicago Board of Trade. I'd like to report that there was more planned coordination and communication between regulators as a result of the procedural framework established by the Presidential Working Group. The Commission staff, as well as I, kept in touch, close touch, with the exchanges, clearing associations, my counterparts, our counterparts in the regulatory agencies, including the Treasury, Council of Economic Advisors. The coordinated circuit breakers with the related shock absorbers, sidecars that were established by the working group last year appeared to function smoothly. The new communication system, what we call Hoot and Holler, that was a communication link between the exchanges and the regulators to share breaking market information, also function well, and I've heard many comments about the value of that particular system. I'm pleased to report that financial integrity in the futures markets remained intact. There were intraday margin calls that were made and collected at the usual times and without incident despite the very heavy volume and significant price moves. There were no financial problems in the futures markets. And because of arrangements put in place as a result of the working group recommendations, there was increased coordination in the clearing and settlement area as well, and that was of particular interest to the working group after the 1987 events, and I'd report that that worked well here. The reforms instituted after the 87 market break, including the circuit breakers, coordinated communication, the clarified settlement agreements between clearing organizations and the settlement banks appear to work as designed. The Commission has already begun an analysis of the markets and that market period, and we will make that available as soon as we can. As you know, that this will engender a number of other studies to look in detail as to what happened and the trading that happened on those days. Today, I'd like to submit for the record a prepared statement describing the Commission's views on S-1729, the Futures Trading Practices Act of 1989. Today, I would just like to highlight the Commission's views on the legislation. Let me reiterate the Commission's commitment to ensuring the integrity of our nation's futures markets and maintaining the public's confidence in those markets. That confidence factor is critically important to the continued growth and international competitiveness of the U.S. futures industry and to everyone who depends on it. Accordingly, we appreciate the efforts of you, Mr. Chairman, as well as Senators Lugar and Kerry, co-sponsors, in introducing a bill that is strong and addresses many of the difficult issues that have arisen in recent months. We support the bill's goals and endorse most of its specific provisions. We also appreciate your favorable consideration of our legislative recommendations for amendments to the Commodity Exchange Act. As explained in our previous submissions to the committee, these amendments will enhance international law enforcement cooperation, provide additional customer protections in bringing private damage actions against fraudulent operators, increase flexibility in the imposition of civil monetary penalties, and require the registration of floor traders. I'd also like to take this opportunity, Mr. Chairman, to apprise you that the Commission is completing its empirical study on dual trading that was initiated earlier this year. I'd like to just briefly summarize its finding. The study measures the extent of dual trading and performs certain statistical analyses concerning possible benefits of dual trading. In summary, the vast majority of dual traders are highly specialized as either customer traders or personal traders. Further, tests of relative performance do not indicate that dual traders as a group are superior traders or brokers compared to non-dual traders. The tests indicate that dual and non-dual traders are similar in terms of the trade executions and liquidity they provide to the market. Our results indicate that dual traders do not trade more intensively in either low-volume markets or distant trading months. Based on these results and considering the problems associated with dual trading, the Commission is prepared to begin rulemaking to restrict dual trading subject to certain exceptions. Obviously, the exceptions and details of implementation will be described in the forthcoming rules and publication requesting public comment. The Commission will be providing a more detailed briefing to the public, to Congress and its staff, and interested people when we release the study. We will be releasing the study in a week or two. This initiative is intended to address the concerns that motivated the proposed legislation to limit dual trading included in both Senate and House bills. I'd now like to highlight just a few provisions of S. 1729 and some suggestions for change. We believe the provisions for enhanced audit trail and improved trade surveillance and disciplinary systems at the exchanges will be valuable additions to the Commission's existing oversight program. As you know, an improved audit trail has been a long-held Commission goal. We do, however, have some concerns about legislatively mandating technology in advance of evidence that the mechanisms are technologically feasible, practicable, or free of potentially more troublesome attributes. Substituting the words practicable for feasible in the standard will go a long way for providing flexibility. We understand the bill considerably broadens the reach of the anti-fraud provisions of Section 4B of the Act. Under existing law, Section 4B applies to acts or omissions where there is direct harm to the customer. Among other things, proposed Section 4BE appears to permit persons with no customer or other relationship with a wrongdoer to bring suit. Based upon our experience using Section 4B to combat fraud, it's our belief that this increased prospect of liability could have a significant and perhaps unintended impact upon the operations of brokerage firms and other industry professionals. The Commission supports most of S. 1729's provisions, which would strengthen and expand penalties and increase the range of law enforcement and customer remedies available under the Act. However, we believe that further clarification is necessary. Is it the intent of Congress, for example, to create felonies for missing reporting deadlines or for violations of minor bookkeeping or record-keeping requirements? I should also bring to your attention, Mr. Chairman, that with regard to empowering the Commission to order customer restitution in administrative cases, the Commission supports customer restitution as a remedy. However, a majority of the Commission believes that current law provides sufficient recourse
you can provide an incentive in here.
for customers to obtain reimbursement of losses when funds are available, and in many cases, funds are not. The Commission can and does already seek disgorgement of funds for customers in federal injunctive actions under the Act's current provisions. Furthermore, under the private right of action, customers can go to federal courts to seek restitution. Customers can also seek restitution in exchange or NFA arbitration forum. Finally, the Commission has, as you know, a unique reparations program, unlike other independent enforcement agencies, that allows customers to obtain damages through a Commission reparations program. Thus, a majority of the Commission believes that additional authorities is not necessary and could serve instead to raise expectations or to detract from these other avenues. In conclusion, Mr. Chairman, despite a few concerns, we believe S. 1729 is a good bill which provides the Commission with resources necessary to enhance its regulatory authority and achieve desired improvements in the system. And we look forward to working with the committee further in the weeks ahead to develop a bill that ensures market integrity without compromising the flexibility needed to respond to a changing marketplace. Thank you. Be happy to answer questions.
Thank you. I noticed in your testimony on the second page, bottom paragraph, you say, based on these results and considering the problems associated with dual trading, the Commission is prepared to write rules to restrict dual trading subject to certain exceptions. These exceptions and details of implementation will be described in the forthcoming proposed rules and publication requesting public comment. Now, is that an approach similar to what is in the Senate bill?
Obviously, the details of what the rulemaking would not be, has not been done yet. But yes, we believe that the approach that we are thinking about would be consistent with what is in the bill.
Now, are you, going back to last Friday's market problems, are you satisfied with the level of intermarket coordination that occurred there? What
Yes,
you've
I-
seen so far?
Yes, I am.
Is the storm past for these markets, or are we facing some heavy volatility in days ahead? Every broker in the country is weighing your answer.
As you know, I make no market predictions.
Do you think are there any automatic signs of heavy volatility that you see?
Not at this point.
Now, in S-1729, we expand the CFTC's authority to charge fees against industry participants, those that benefit from the services and the activities of the CFTC. And what we intend to do, as you know, is to recoup about the amount of the increases in the CFTC budget that will be authorized under this bill. There will be significant increase. Based on what you've seen in the legislation, how much money per year do you think that 1729 would enable the CFTC to collect through these service fees?
Well, based on the specific authorities that were mentioned in S-1729 and providing for, say, increased fees to cover increased floor surveillance, I think we estimated that that would come to about $4.9 million per year. Is that correct?
It's additional to what we're collecting now.
In addition to
In
this.
addition to what you're already collecting in service fees, but it'd be about 4.9 million?
That's right.
Thank you. And we also in S-1729 require the exchanges to implement new audit trail technologies in 3 years, able to record trade times in a form that can't be altered by the trader. In other words, once it's recorded, that's it. Nobody can alter it. And that concern, of course, rises from the allegations in the recent Chicago indictments that some traders made fraudulent entries on trading cards or on their manual audit trail records. Now, do you agree with us that anything less than, quote, an independent, precise, and complete, close quote, audit trail is not sufficient to police the trading pits against abuses?
Well, I would, and I've looked at the GAO report as well on this, that I think the question that I would agree that more precise timing and independent or unable to be altered trading cards can increase our ability to both deter and detect some kinds of trading abuses. But there are other kinds of trading abuses as well that the improvement wouldn't necessarily catch. For example, some of the kinds of violations that were occurring as part of the indictments.
But then, let me make sure I understand your answer. Are you saying that you can do your enforcement without independent, precise, and complete audit trails?
No, I think...
I mean, you have different kinds of enforcement, but are you better off with or without
as you
independent,
know,
precise, and complete audit trails?
as you know, the Commission is long committed to improving audit trails and getting more precise information, as well as, and I'd point out in the independent aspect that our recent efforts in rulemaking to remove the trading cards from the hands of traders would achieve some of the similar results of independence that is unable to be altered.
My last question, and I'll submit my other questions for the record, but 2 weeks ago, the CFTC rejected by a 3-2 vote a proposal which we had contained in S-1729, which would allow the CFTC administrative law judges to require defendants found to have defrauded customers to pay restitution to those customers. And your argument, as I read it and as I understand it, is that existing remedies for customer recovery are good enough. This new one's not needed. Now, according to the figures cited by Commissioner Fowler West at your meeting, however, the total estimated customer losses in CFTC administrative injunction and other cases were more than $80 million in fiscal 1988 alone, where the total fines, disgorgements, and restitutions were $13.7 million, a small fraction of that $80 million. With that kind of a record, how in good conscience can you block any proposal aimed at helping customers recover their losses from fraudulent operators on the grounds that current avenues of restitution are good enough? I mean, aren't you there to protect the people? I mean, you're a public body, not a industry body. That's your public body. How can you say that if the losses are $80 million, we're doing good enough if we recover 13.7?
Let me clarify my comments. The Commission supports getting customer restitution where there are funds to be gotten, and I would say that in many cases when we've gone in, when customers have lost money, there isn't money to be had from the firm that has been doing the defrauding. And the Commission's position, while the Commission supports getting customer restitution, the Commission feels that there are these other 4 avenues, and we would not want to deter or detract or to raise customer expectations and detract from these other avenues that are available. And the Commission does and seek disgorgement of customer funds in federal district court as well. Yeah, when the funds are available, we seek that as a remedy.
But your 3-2 vote doesn't indicate that. You say that we all kind of want everybody to recover, but don't ask us to help. We'll block your recovery. We'll block your recovery so we don't hold out false hopes. I don't understand that at all.
Well, I think that the 3-2 vote indicates that it was a close Commission decision, and as I indicated earlier, the Commission, all members of the Commission support customer restitution as a remedy. And we just felt that there are these other avenues, such as the Commission's reparations program, as well as a private right of action, as well as a Commission seeking the injunctive action in federal court, where there are funds available.
Well, we have a proposal in 1729 which would allow the CFTC administrative law judges to require defendants found to have defrauded customers to pay restitution to those customers. Are you in favor of that provision or not?
Is that the majority of the Commission just feels that that is not necessary?
I understand what the vote was. Are you in favor of that provision or not?
That I voted with a majority on that provision.
Mrs. Graham, your vote is a matter of record. Are you in favor of that provision in S 1729 or not?
No, I'm not.
Okay, thank you. Senator Lugar?
Mr. Chairman, I asked unanimous consent that the statement that I would have offered at the beginning of the hearing be put as part of the record, and I apologize that another meeting made it impossible for me to be here at the beginning. I have no questions, and we'll try to expedite the hearing by passing at this point.
Thank you. Then we will go to Senator Kerry, Senator Bond, Senator Conrad, Senator Daschle, and Senator Fowler. Senator Kerry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Graham, I'd like to follow on the question that Senator Leahy asked. As I understood it, the proposed rule would simply have given the administrative law judge the option. It didn't require that restitution be made in every instance. It simply gave the judge the option of making restitution when money was available. Further, it directed the CFTC to simply take customer losses into account. I don't find that inconsistent at all with your stated objective of making sure that other avenues were used. Certainly, if the customer was suggesting that if money was available and the judge was willing to take losses into account, I don't understand at all why you oppose that particular change in the law.
We do, as a matter of Commission policy, do take customer losses into into account, and also take into account whether or not a firm has made restitution to customers. That is something that we do.
But the law judge, the administrative law judge, currently can't take customer losses into account and currently doesn't have the option of ordering restitution if money is available. I just leave it at that. I mean, I wanted to align myself with the chairman and feeling that this is a very reasonable thing, not anything at all that would interfere with the CFTC. I really didn't want to stir up additional comment because I think you've answered the question and offered reasons why you don't think the change should be made. Let me talk a little bit about undercover investigations. You and I have had previous discussions about it. You may be aware that Ag Secretary Yider, after the last hearing that we had, has made statements to the fact that the FBI sting operation showed that the exchange and the commission leaders did not find all the wrongdoing, and that giving the CFTC authority to conduct undercover investigations would be a step towards increasing confidence. You seem to believe that that's not necessary. Is that true?
I believe that the current situation with the FBI having the authority is sufficient. That in fact that kind of coordination has occurred with the undercover operation, the sting operation that we all know about, that's been publicized, that is an example of how government law enforcement officials can coordinate and indeed in a very effective way.
Let me describe to you the coordination as I see it, Madam Chairman, and you tell me if you think that I'm right or wrong. Customers were not getting their complaints satisfied at the CFTC, brought a number of complaints to the U.S. Attorney Anton Valukas, who began an investigation on his own, and when the investigation was pretty well ongoing, he notified you that something was about to happen.
No, that is not. We participated in that investigation from the beginning.
You self-generated and went to Anton Valukas and said, we've got some problems here, and would you do an undercover investigation?
I didn't say that we self-generated it, and as a matter of fact, that the issue of exactly the beginnings of the investigation is something that, as you know, the Justice Department has kept confidential, that for various reasons is something that is not disclosed, but we have
I'm growing increasingly uncomfortable with the various reasons, I must tell you, because it's a very key point in our trying to determine whether or not to give you this authority. Right. I mean, at some point it seems to me that we're going to either have to have those various reasons, or people like me will simply conclude, and I think there's sufficient reason to conclude it, that the CFTC was not going to pursue an investigation, that without the U.S. Attorney's Office following through on their own, this investigation would not have occurred at all. That's what people like me will conclude, unless those various reasons are supplied to us. Because it seems to me that
excuse me, but I would like to put in the record of the hearing a letter from the U.S. Attorney, that the only one actually that came early on, that indicated that he was thanking me for our participation in that undercover study, in that undercover operation, and indicated that we're participating since its inception. That letter came to me unsolicited. I think it was sometime in February or March earlier this year. But again, the details of who started what when are details that, as you know, the Justice Department has kept confidential. And I have made them know of the fact that you as oversight are very interested in just exactly those issues, given your concern of oversight over our committee.
I have seen the letter that because you provided in a previous hearing that letter, but I'm just telling you that I have reached the conclusion that had Anton Valukas not generated that investigation on his own, no investigation would have occurred. I have reached that conclusion. That you cooperated, that you didn't obstruct the investigation, is a secondary matter to me. I have concluded that the generation of the investigation occurred as a consequence of complaints filed to the U.S. Attorney's Office, not as a consequence of complaints filed to the CFTC.
I would like to also just to let you know about our commitment to undercover operations as a general matter. I am very strongly in favor of having undercover operations occur. The kind of cooperation with the FBI is not only existed in the past, but is continuing and will continue in the future. That I have had several conversations with with Judge Sessions and his staff, so you can be assured that that kind of coordination and cooperation will continue.
You're quoted in the Chicago Tribune on the 3rd of August in response to a question about this kind of undercover operation that, quote, "The FBI basically has the authority to break a lot of laws in order to do the undercover operation, and we want to leave the undercover authority with the folks who do that." Is that an accurate description of your feelings towards the FBI and their authority?
I think, yes, I think that they have the expertise as well as a lot of experience now over the last 20 years in the actual conduct and the kinds of problems that occur with complicated undercover type operations. And I would, if you're interested in that, I'd be happy to have the FBI come up and explain those aspects with you. But they do have the authority, for example, to bypass a lot of the laws that govern, for example, government employees with respect to contracting, with respect to false identities, to trading on exchanges, to keeping the funds from the trades, all those, you might say, the more technical details of the undercover. Obviously, there has to be coordination and cooperation and real close contact among the agents and the CFTC because of the expertise, the knowledge of what makes a trading violation, where the customer is abused, and how, and what kinds of records must be used to build the best case. And that is the kind of effort and support in staffing that we provide and will continue to provide in the future.
I mean, my discomfiture is as a consequence of your observation, A, that the FBI has the authority to break a lot of laws, and that B, you think, if that is your observation, that that's the preferred agency then to carry out these undercover operations.
Perhaps a philosophical point. In my view, the operation that occurred in the past is a good example of how agencies can work together in something very complicated, very innovative for financial markets, and come to some real conclusions. All right, we have 46 indictments. All right, now I know that the process is still ongoing, and let me not prejudge it, but still, we can come to some very vigorous law enforcement conclusions there, and again, the investigation is still ongoing. We support that. My view is that if things work well, unless there's something that needs to be changed, that we don't seek the extra authority. I mean, that's, again, so it's the reason why, for the previous vote that concerned you. If there are other avenues and producing results that I don't see a need for that particular change. That's not to say, that's very different from saying that I oppose doing undercover operations at all. That's wrong. I think that undercover operations may well be the only way you can catch some kinds of violations on the trading floors, and certainly may be the most cost-effective way to do so.
I'm sure, Madam Chair, that you've read and heard in my statements to Senator Eagleton that I have a philosophy that says that you should hold responsible those who are in charge for whatever happens under their control. And I don't want this to be personal, but I've got questions about whether the Commission itself has done all that it could. I mean, I would like to ascertain, for example, if your job is a full-time job. Do you work all of your hours at the CFTC?
It's more than a full-time job.
Do you work no additional hours for this administration in other policy areas?
In other policy areas, no.
You spend no time in your working week doing other policy considerations for this administration?
No. I spend all my time on this job. I mean, from time to time, other people may ask me issues that have come from but no time, no significant time is spent on other
Let
than
me
my
give you one
job.
more time to answer this question, Madam Chair. When they ask you questions, do you say to them, I don't have time to answer that, or do you allocate some of your time to attempt to answer other domestic policy questions that face the administration?
I'm not aware of other domestic policy issues that have come up to me to spend any significant time on.
I didn't say significant time, Madam Chair. I asked you any time, and you said none. And now you're qualifying with significant. Let me be the judge of whether it's significant or not. Do you spend any of your time on other policy matters?
I think I might spend a few minutes from over the weeks on if someone asks me about an issue or remembering an issue that I might have dealt with back when I was at OMB, but just to refresh their memory. But I don't. Again, that's not. It might be 5 minutes of a telephone call. Do you remember what occurred on with respect to a statistical policy issue or something like that?
No more than that. You would never leave the office to go to OMB, leave the office to participate in other policy matters other than your work.
Oh, certainly
at
not
CFTC.
on anything other than financial market and other financial policy issues.
Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Bond?
Madam Chairman, maybe it'd be helpful to know how many hours a week do you normally spend on the work of the CFTC?
How many hours per week? Let's see. Normally get in around 8, more recently 7:30 in the morning when the markets are busy, leaving around 7 in the evening. This weekend we had a meeting on Sunday, and so we were in all weekend.
There have been some, so I'd be fair to say,
it'd be fair to say that I'd
60 hours plus.
At least.
I think
at least.
That's certainly not insignificant, and I'd say a very great dedication to the work. There's been some other questions raised about the activity of the commission and whether it's a sleeping giant or sleeping pygmy. Would you like to comment, or Sleeping Beauty, would you like to comment on the attitude and the mission as you see the CFTC under your leadership?
I'd be happy to. I'd like to say that I prefer being a sleeping beauty than a sleeping pygmy. But I think it's important to remember that the Commission is very active, even when you don't, not everything necessarily makes the news, but we do an awful lot of our activity in a way that is quiet and does not make the news. Our rule enforcement reviews, for example, the fact that we do our ongoing market surveillance that goes well in advance of anything that might become public, and many things do not become public. That in the past year and a half, for example, that I've been there, we have, the Commission has responded to the events of the stock market crash, and I think very responsibly so. I think the events after 1987 indicated that the futures market, and indeed the regulatory structures in place there, were strong, and indeed a lot stronger than expected, given the volatility back in 1987. That we didn't have any financial losses due to failures of firms back even in 1987. That obviously the investigation that occurred, we've had strong Commission action and involvement in that, with cooperation with the law enforcement agencies. We've brought other very significant cases over the last months in sales practice fraud, for example, that are dealing with very large firms. That, as a matter of fact, my Director of Division of Enforcement received a presidential award, merit award, this past year that I recommended him for, and that he was given, that was given to, what, 1/2% of the SES. And so we've been very vigorous in the way of law enforcement, cooperative law enforcement, not only at the FBI highly publicized levels, but also on our own and with the state and local officials. That we have made great strides in the ways of international cooperation and cooperation with international law enforcement efforts, as well as other international regulators. We have some far-reaching memorandum of understanding to share information with international coordination. And I think that the events, while people may disagree on the events of the soybeans, frankly, we monitored those markets over the years, much of which was not in public, and averted what could have been a very disorderly situation there. And I think in all respects, this commission has been indeed very vigorous. We've responded to what we found with the indictments. As I kept saying, that one of the purposes of an undercover investigation is to determine what changes and what reforms might be made and needs to be made. And indeed, we have moved forward on a number of reforms, not the least of which is a dual trading study, but rulemakings in response to what we've found over the past year and a half.
Madam Chairman, I know it's still too early, as Senator Eagleton and I discussed, to evaluate all the things that have happened as of last Friday and yesterday, but I would say that even though the fall was not as precipitous and there were not the other factors involved that were in '87, at least on the surface it appears that definite progress has been made. I would certainly compliment you and the working group and the exchanges for adopting reforms and improvements in procedures which led to many of the actions taken. We're obviously going to be having more hearings on that in this committee, and probably also in the Banking Committee we'll get to hear discussions again.
And I forgot to mention that as well.
All right. Just a couple of questions. You've indicated in your testimony that there should be some exceptions to restricting dual trading. How would you deal with liquidity problems that the bill might raise if strict ban on dual trading was applied on smaller exchanges?
Basically, Senator, that the details of the ban and what kinds of exceptions, say if there would be exceptions for customers who would want to use a dual trader, or exceptions, for example, for new contracts or whatever, that those are details that the Commission has yet to address, but they will certainly be addressed during the rulemaking process.
Do you have any concerns on a broader scale that some of the provisions in the bill might result in U.S. markets, particularly the Chicago markets, losing their edge internationally, with the result that we'd see some more of this particular type of financial transaction moving overseas? And if so, which provisions and what could be done to alleviate the problem?
I think, as I indicated in my testimony, there are several areas of concern. One is the concern about mandating a technology for which there might be some other more serious problems, or that might not be technologically feasible. That, as you know, the Commission has been very active in monitoring computerization and things like Globex. But again, there aren't many computerized systems, trading systems, not many around the world, and not many that are have large volumes either. And there could be other problems that we need to be very careful about, such as computer security and financial integrity. So I have some concerns there of mandating something that may not, that may have other problems or may not be practicable. There are some other provisions in here that could create additional concerns about liability for some of the big FCMs, for example. That would have a greater effect on the FCM group, the large institutions, rather than the exchanges. So there are some things that may affect exchanges and the costs of therein, but also some that affect other institutions, the institutions as well.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I'll pass.
Thank you, Senator Bond. Chairman Graham, if the FBI investigation turned up some 46 indictments, approximately 19 of those were traders in the soybean pit. Could you tell me if, to your knowledge, any of those traders are still actively trading?
I believe that there are, in the soybean pit, I will have to get that information for you, but I do have it here. There are some that may be trading, but there are not none trading for customers. I'll have to get that information and provide that for you.
Have you got any ballpark estimate of how many of those that are under indictment are still trading?
Of the 46 traders, it is my understanding that there are about, and I will have to get the correct figures for you, there are about 17 that may be trading on, and I believe that on the Chicago Board of Trade, none of those are trading for any customers.
As I understand it, your indication is of the 46 who were indicted, some 17 are still trading. Is that approximately
Yes.
correct?
I believe so.
Does that raise questions in your mind as to the enforcement mechanism of the exchanges?
As you know, that these, the traders are indicted yet, and they are going through the process, and they are.
Well, haven't we had 46 indictments, aren't they?
That's right. 46 indictments. Of those, 8 were settlements. And I believe that, that some firms have voluntarily had kept some of the traders from trading.
Well, let me take, I'm a bit confused here by your answer, because I indicated that 46 were indicted.
That's right.
And you indicated 17 are still trading. Then you indicated they weren't yet indicted, that they were going through the process.
No, I'm sorry. They're indicted, but they're not, they haven't been tried or found guilty in some yet.
Yeah, my question is, if people have been indicted and are still trading, doesn't that raise some question about the enforcement mechanism of the exchanges, the policing mechanism? Are you comfortable with the fact that 17 of 46 who were indicted are still trading, according to your numbers?
I do have some concerns about that, and I did speak to the exchanges about that issue, that it is my understanding that of the people who are trading, that there are some that are trading only, that are not handling any customer accounts, basically, at all, just trading for themselves. But I do believe there are some, maybe some 11 that are trading, still trading, and we do have some concerns about that.
There are 11 who are still trading?
Trading for customers, including...
Who were indicted?
Who have been indicted, but not yet found guilty.
Well, let me ask you, I mean, that strikes me as raising serious questions about the process that we have here, the enforcement process that we have. If you share that concern, as I hear you saying that you do, what have you done about the fact that 11 of the 46 who are indicted are still trading for accounts other than their own?
Well, we have looked at just at what our authorities are, but you also recognize that these are traders that are also, they're indicted, but they're still going through the process of...
Still going through the legal process.
That's right.
I understand that, but what I'm asking you is if you are concerned about 11 of 46 who are indicted still trading for accounts other than their own, trading for public accounts, my question is, what have you and what has the CFTC done about it?
Well, the Commission and I have researched what avenues there are with respect to those who may still be trading. But again, the Commission, and it's something that we at the Commission have discussed, we have balanced the concern about trading against the individual, basically the individual rights of the traders who are not yet,
Well, what about
innocent until proven guilty, basically.
What about the public rights of those who ought to have confidence, ought to have ability to have confidence in the markets? I mean, I must say I'm finding these answers disturbing. If we've got folks that have been indicted for abuse of their trust, and 11 of the 46 are still trading for public accounts, 17 are still trading, what does that do for confidence in these markets?
Again,
I mean, what do we say to the farmers out there who are dependent on these markets to get a fair deal, and they've got 11 people still trading for their accounts who are under indictment?
first of all, I don't think any are trading on the Chicago Board of Trade. There are none that are trading for customer accounts at all. But again, you might raise that with the exchanges. I did raise that with the exchanges, and that, again,
well,
it's a balance off, again, about people being innocent until proven guilty. It is a concern at the Commission about their registration, and the Commission did consider whether or not we should move forward in pulling those registrations.
You're the regulator. You're the regulator. And if you've got 46 people that are indicted, and according to your testimony, as I heard it, perhaps I misunderstood, 11 of those were still trading for accounts other than their own. And my question to you is, if you are concerned about it, you indicated you're concerned, what have you and the Commission done as the regulator to assure the public that they're dealing with honest folks?
Well, we have done a lot of things to assure the public.
With respect to these 11?
With respect to, again, with respect to those 11, I think that the U.S. Attorney has been quite clear about that. You must remember that they are innocent until proven guilty. However, the Commission has raised that concern with the exchanges, and, you know, again, at this point has not taken action in that particular area.
Does that leave you with some concern about the process here? I mean, if people are under indictment for cheating customers and they're still out there trading, doesn't that raise some concern about what kind of a process we've got here? I mean, shouldn't they be suspended? Shouldn't something happen? Shouldn't you as the regulator be involved in assuring folks that are out there as customers are getting an honest shake?
Indeed. Again, there are, as I said, that's something that the Commission has considered in the past. The U.S. Attorney, I think, and again, the U.S. Attorney as well as we are concerned about not bringing overlapping cases, but again, with respect to that particular registration issue, that is something the Commission has considered and has, you know,
done nothing.
We have considered and decided earlier on that we would not take action at that time.
So you've considered it and done nothing?
Considered against moving forward in a legal action that would have some question. It was some questionable.
I just say in conclusion, Mr. Chairman, I don't think that's very confidence building for those who are out there who are reliant on these markets.
It would involve questionable use of our authority to be able to pull the registration.
I wonder
from, and again, bearing in mind, I think the other factor is that there are those that are innocent until proven guilty, basically.
Dr. Graham, could the exchanges themselves suspend these 11?
The exchanges themselves, as I understand, have taken some voluntary actions.
Could they suspend them? Could they? Not whether they have or not, could they?
I believe they could suspend them.
Have they taken any action to suspend them?
No. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think I'll have to get back to you. It's my understanding that they couldn't suspend them, but they have asked the firms to keep some of the traders from trading for customer accounts, and that's how you have the difference. You have some of them not trading.
Is that all they can do? Just say, please, you're under indictment, please don't trade? I mean, I don't mean to be, I'm not trying to be sarcastic.
Let me
finish. I just want to make sure I fully understand this. Is all they can do is say, while you're under indictment, realizing such cases can go on for years and years and years with appeals, and I understand that. But is all the exchanges can do is simply say, there are these indictments, you're in the middle of trials, whatever, please don't trade?
As I recall, and again, I'll have to check on that because these conversations were held several months ago.
I know, but the rules are
As
the
I
rules.
recall that they felt they did not have that, at least one exchange did not.
Well, Madam
have
Chair,
that,
or Dr. Graham, and I'm sorry, I
Yeah.
cut in here, but you are, after all, the chair of the CFTC, and would you do me a favor and check and find out whether either you or the exchanges have the authority to stop these people from trading? It
Right.
is a matter of more than passing moment
Right.
in this whole area.
I do know about the CFTC, and that is with the CFTC, there is some question about our authority that if we were to start a process, that when we research it, we start a process, there would be some fair risk of losing that case.
Well, tell you what, if there's some question on it, it's become more than abstract and academic. Why don't you see if you can resolve the question and let us know, because if there really is a question, maybe we'll have some legislation on it. And because this is something that is so critical to the way you'd be able to run the CFTC, it might be a good time to find out the answer about what the exchanges are able to do. Under our, we have Senator Daschle, Senator Cochran, and Senator McConnell. Senator Daschle.
Dr. Graham, I'd be interested if you could just tell us what your position would be, since you've considered it a good deal, and obviously the CFTC has come to the conclusion that because of the legality matter here that you may or may not have the authority. Would you support legislation to clarify your authority to do this in the reauthorization bill?
Personally,
Yes.
I would support that.
You would support it?
Yes.
In response to so many of your questions today, you've indicated a justifiable interest, in my view, of the need to be sensitive to international competition. But I think at the same time, you've not shown the kind of sensitivity to consumer confidence. I think we have to be sensitive to both, and I'm sure you'd agree with that. I think of all the things that the bill introduced by Senators Lugar and Leahy do that would allow us to be sure that consumer confidence is attained in the future, is the one which enhances your enforcement powers, boosting your funding authority by 50% and expanding your powers to charge service fees to allow the adequate resources to ensure that you have the capability in the future. Do you support that?
I do support that, and I would also support that. I would also say that we are, at the Commission, are very cognizant of our role as primarily a role of customer protection and market integrity. That is the main mission of this Commission, and we do carry that out vigorously. But we do support the increase in resources as well as the use of fees. And now, whether or not the fees that are talked about here would support the whole increase or not, I think we indicated that the fees that are talked about here would support about a $4.9 million increase in the fees that we do receive. But we do support the increase in the Commission size as well.
What would you do immediately upon receiving the additional authority to increase resources? Where would you put those resources?
We already have a plan that I'd like to, as a matter of fact, since it's fiscal year 91 and 92 that we're talking about, that I would like to increase by 30 for floor surveillance, and in particular, I also have in place a plan to increase the size by small amounts, but for a small agency, it's a significant increase in our proceedings, which includes the reparations program in the information resources management area because of the computerization that's occurring and the extra technical expertise that we need. But across the board, we feel like we need resources for economic analysis, for our market surveillance, for our enforcement, We've been increasing our Division of Enforcement. It's our largest division now, but again, more resources there. And also in trading and markets, which has been a real workhorse over the past few years and is in sore need of more resources.
I don't know that you can compare SEC and CFTC in this regard, but I think it's appropriate to mention that when it comes to resources, the SEC has 4 times the resources you do and had 5 times the enforcement actions you did last year. You had only 1/5 the enforcement actions the SEC did. Would you attribute that largely to your lack of resources?
I wouldn't say it's entirely due to lack of resources. We have a smaller number of people that we regulate, for example, and there are a large number of other factors that account for that. We also have a very large reparations programs that again, a lot of, and I think our arbitration programs that the exchanges and the NFA had is effective in providing some recourse for customers.
I'd ask if I could clarify something with regard to the oral statement you made, and you made it also in reference to one of the earlier questioners. I don't recall now who it was, but you indicated that you have some concern about mandating technology in advance of evidence that the mechanisms are technologically feasible, practical, or free of troublesome attitudes. Referring, of course, to electronic trading, COMEX in the last couple of weeks has announced that they will institute an electronic trading program. Other financial institutions in other parts of the world have already indicated that they find it to be a satisfactory means of trading. Are you referring here to electronic trading? And if so, in light of COMEX's decision, how do you find that there would be some difficulty in mandating technology that is already being used by one of the exchanges here in this country?
I think that with respect to the COMEX decision, the handheld technology, there's the Globex technology, all of that technology, I'd say that we at the Commission are very eager to monitor that very carefully. We've spent a lot of time and resources in the approval process in Globex, for example, to ensure that those systems have integrity and are secure. But these systems are not in place yet. They're still at very early stages. In COMEX, for example, that is not, hasn't been tested yet. Globex is in testing. And again, given concerns over computer security and other issues, again, we want to be able to monitor very carefully those systems as they're tested. And so they're not in place yet. And there could be some unforeseen problems. They might not work as well. They might have other problems that we don't know. So that's just a concern.
Well, let me just tell
that
you,
doesn't,
I really don't think, with all due respect, Dr. Graham, that you have anywhere near the appreciation of the difficulty in perception that exists today with regard to the CFTC and consumer confidence. It seems to me every time anyone has brought up a problem today, you've cited reasons why that particular action may be unwarranted. Each one of them undermining dramatically the consumer confidence that people have in your regulatory ability. Sooner or later, you're either going to enhance it or you're going to lose it, but it's not going to stay the same. My hunch is that if the Commission continues to conduct itself in the way that it has with this benign examination of what is happening in front of them, you are going to lose it. And this is just another example. I think this bill and other opportunities, whether you like it per se or not, is irrelevant. But we need to use this vehicle to give you the kind of ability necessary to send a message to the whole country that consumer confidence is paramount in importance, and you're going to do all you can to ensure that it happens. And I frankly don't see that in the response to the questions you've been asked this morning, nor in response to the kinds of opportunities the industry itself is taking to see that it happens. So I would hope that you'd reconsider some of these things, and as you consider each and every one of your options, remember the importance of consumer confidence even more than the importance of international competition, because if we can't keep our customers here at home, it doesn't matter whether we lose business abroad. We've got to keep our customers here first.
Senator, I agree with you, and I would say that, as I said early on, the questions haven't come to the issues that we agree with and that we vigorously support in this bill.
Well, I don't see much vigor this morning.
This is a bill that we think is very strong and has a lot of good elements to it, that in fact the Commission has undertaken a lot of reforms and rules that we're in the process of proposing and implementing right now in response to the need for customer confidence. And I would agree, and the people in the industry have heard me talk about customer confidence and the need for reform. I put a speech into the record that I just gave at a recent industry conference on just that particular issue.
Thank you. We'll go in just a moment to Senator Cochran and Senator McConnell and Senator Gorton, but just so everybody will know the schedule, we will stay on this hearing until 12:30. I'm going to be leaving momentarily to take over as a manager of an item on the floor. And we will come back so I will be in and out. We'll go to 12:30, recess for the Republican and Democratic caucuses. At that time, we will come back at 2:30 after that, because I understand there is a roll call vote, Dick, on the floor, 2:15, and everybody will be over there for that anyway, so there's no sense in scheduling it to come back at 2. We will come back at 2:30, and we will stay through the hearing until it is completed. Thank you, Senator Cochran.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Graham, welcome to the committee hearing, and let me say that I know that the Commission has been at work reviewing the suggested changes in authority that are prescribed in this bill before us today, and other changes that are designed to improve the confidence of those who use the exchanges and who trade, who are interested in the integrity of the system. And I'm hoping that this hearing, rather than ending up being a finger-pointing exercise or an exercise in who can ask questions the loudest and therefore be perceived to be the most concerned and conscientious in their efforts to deal with these problems, will really enable us to understand what authorities the Commission needs now that it doesn't have, that would equip it to do its job better, to reach the goals that we all have. And in that connection, in your review of the Leahy-Lugar bill that is pending now before the committee, what, if anything, would you ask the committee to include as new authority for the Commission to enable it to do a better job or to meet some of the challenges that we face in this modern era?
I would say that there is one proposal that was a recent proposal of the Commission that the committee did not have, our Senators Leahy and Lugar did not have a chance to put into this bill that we would like to have, and that is, it's a section that would give us the authority to get information from the unregulated affiliates of Futures Commission's merchants. That it is really one of the recommendations that came to us after the market events of October of '87. We haven't necessarily had the need to use it this time in response to the last few days. That hasn't arisen. However, it is an authority we believe is very useful. It would give us the ability to get information about potential financial risk of an affiliate of a firm that we would regulate. And we would like that authority, and I'd be happy to have that included as well.
Well, I hope that as we proceed to a markup session, which I understand is scheduled for the near future, that you'll provide some suggested language for us to include as an amendment in that way. I'll be happy to offer that at the markup session.
Thank you. We've included that with our longer package as for part of the record of this hearing.
I also have heard from some who are concerned about the authority that is given to the CFTC in this new legislation to impose service fees, and in some way this could lead to a grasp for greater power or an impetus for the Commission becoming a giant regulatory body as large as it wanted to become by just adding user fees or service fees to those exchanges who are regulated by the Commission. And we could end up with a hydra-headed monster that nobody could control, not even the Congress or the executive branch. What's your reaction to that? Do you see this service fee authority as a temptation by a commission to really assume a lot more power than anybody right here may predict that they would like?
I think not. First of all, I think you should know that in order to, well, we would not have incentive to ask for fees just to make ourselves bigger, because all the fees go directly to the Treasury, first of all, so they do not come to the CFTC. We would not cannot therefore use them directly for our own staffing. They go to the Treasury, and that, I think, splits away the incentive for a bureaucracy just to tax in order to make ourselves bigger. Also, any fees would have to be established by rulemaking, and I understand under the independent, I can't remember the name of the act, but there is a law that says that we may not ask for fees that go above the cost of the service being provided. So that indeed would be limiting.
Do you see the requirements in the Act for the electronic trading or the modern technologies to be included and put into operation within, I think it says, 3 years here in the bill? That being so onerous a financial burden that a lot of the smaller exchanges might actually be put out of business if that is carried forward and enacted into law.
I think it could possibly. I guess the question is that we don't know what the technology what other kinds of technology out there that might be developed that might indeed be cheap enough for some of the smaller exchanges. And at this time, it's hard to predict that. And yeah.
Would we be better off with some sort of testing or study period rather than just a flat edict that no matter whether you came up with something that worked or not, you had to implement it just because it was new?
Well, actually, I think a very small change in the language could do, I think, what the Senate would like to do, and that is to push towards more precise audit trails, but give some flexibility, and that is to put in the words practicable instead of feasible. That is that these technologies would be implemented if practicable, because there might be something that's technologically feasible, but at great expense, and again, or with other problems. Perhaps there's other language that could deal with some of my concerns, that there might be other problems that we haven't seen yet that could make these systems troublesome.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Graham. I think your testimony this morning has been very helpful to the committee, and I congratulate you for it.
Thank you.
I think I'm next, Mr. Chairman.
Senator,
just a couple of questions, Dr. Graham. Would it be practical to place added restrictions on the opening and closing 15 minutes of trading, since those are higher volume times?
Yes, we have some rulemakings with respect to both the open and the close. There are some restrictions that are already being put in place. Let me turn to Alan Seifert, who can give you some details. But we've made some proposals, as well as some exchanges have made some proposals. We think that the open and the close are areas where there have been some problems of violations, and therefore are seeking to improve our monitoring of that area. But Alan,
what are you suggesting in that?
There is a rule proposal out now that includes one provision that would require an audit trail designation for those trades that take place during the opening and trading period. That is, those periods upon which the opening and closing ranges are based. In addition, we are undertaking a rulemaking to require exchanges to have some provision for customer orders to be executed perhaps by some average price or some other mechanism that would provide customers with some heightened degree of assurance as to the quality of the executions that they receive during those periods of time.
In addition to looking at restrictions on the open and close, have you also looked at maybe restricting dual trading to certain pits? Have you looked at that way of getting at it?
I think you missed my opening statement, but I have in my opening statement, we are concluding our study on testing some hypotheses concerning dual trading, the benefits of dual trading. And based on that and problems associated with dual trading, we'll be working on a rulemaking to restrict dual trading. And the details are not yet.
When do you expect that to be completed?
Well, what I would like to do is, in the next week or two, to release publicly the study, the economic analysis that we've done on the dual trading, with a rulemaking to follow, hopefully by Thanksgiving. But the rulemaking, as we see it now, would be consistent with the provisions of the bill, the Senate bill now as it stands.
Hey, Dr. Graham, one final question. I understand that a couple of years ago, the CFTC created an agricultural advisory committee.
Yes.
And I'm wondering how extensive a use do you make of this committee?
The Agriculture Advisory Committee is chaired by Commissioner Kalo Heineman, who's a longtime producer, 40-year producer, farmer and rancher. And it is very valuable to the Commission as a way of getting input from the agriculture community and to give them information about what the Commission is doing. We found them very valuable, for example, in the latest soybean episode, of getting their comments and views, as well as telling them what the Commission does and did during the particular, the events arising with respect to the May and July soybean.
So you call on them frequently, do you?
Well, typically, the meetings are every 6 months or so, but we can call them and did call an extra meeting this past summer, and indeed, Commissioner Heineman keeps in constant contact with all of its various members.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Please.
Senator Gordon.
Dr. Graham, I guess I have a more fundamental question or a more fundamental position. I tend to agree with some of the frustration that was expressed earlier here by Senator Daschle. I'm sorry, I spent the earlier part of this morning in a fascinating hearing on what went on in Panama last week and missed Senator Eagleton's statement. But as I read through Senator Eagleton's statement, I find a great deal with which I agree. He makes a conditional suggestion, which I would make much less conditional, and I'd ask you to do the best job you possibly can to get out from under the hat you particularly wear, and tell me why in the world there's any justification for the existence of the Commodity Futures Trading Commission. I don't believe, to be perfectly frank with you, that any bill we can write, and I think this is a good bill, is ever going to cure the problem of a group of exchanges which are engaged in activities very closely parallel to those which are governed by the Securities and Exchange Commission, governed by a completely separate commission with different people operating under a different law and under an obviously different philosophy. We lucked out on Friday and over the weekend. We had the tremendous disparity between futures trading and actual stock prices in New York, and we worried all weekend as to whether or not we were going to see a repeat of 2 years ago and didn't do it. But in my view, to a large extent, that simply was blind luck. Why in the world should not these exchanges be governed by the SEC?
Okay, let me first of all make a couple comments that, first of all, as you know, futures products are different than stocks, that we regulate hedging and price discovery, but also the hedging and risk transfer contracts. And it's true that the underlying cash market product is important. And just as in the case of soybeans, that we have to understand the soybean market to be able to understand soybean futures markets and to monitor those markets effectively. Same with the stock futures, that is stock index futures and the underlying cash markets that the SEC regulates are two markets that are very linked. But again, how we regulate futures is different than how the underlying cash markets, and we are more similar in how we, for example, monitor other hedging devices. With respect to the, again, this issue has been discussed before, about the issue of functional regulation. With respect to what happened over the weekend, though, because I think you missed some of my earlier statements, that there has been, over the last 2 years, an awful lot that has been done in response to the market events of 1987, and not the least of which are coordinated circuit breakers, increased communication among regulators, but also clearing and settlement changes that made the events this past week, not to mention probably different market fundamentals, but also the events of this past week, I think indicated that there was an awful lot of cooperation and coordination, that we did have a test of the circuit breakers, and that, obviously there'll be more studies, but all of the circuit breakers and the plans worked as planned, as programmed, and that the clearing and settlement, there were large amounts of margins, intraday margins that were collected, and there were no financial problems at all on the future side of any firm, and the markets are calm today. I don't think it was blind luck, but again, I do think that our activity with the working group and the reforms that were put in place indeed got a test run this past weekend. But I think that everybody's generally pleased with how the coordination and communication went on, and I think that's appropriate, not only among the SEC and the CFTC, but also with the other regulators, the Fed, who came to our, the Fed and the SEC both came to our Sunday surveillance meeting, market surveillance meeting, but also with the Department of Treasury, Council of Economic Advisors as well.
Coordination and cooperation are words we hear in all kinds of contexts, and there's no question but that some of the concepts and the commodities and the titles of what we do are different, but the money is the same. The money moves from Chicago to New York with great ease, and as a matter of fact moves because of differences in spite of all of these things you've stated. And I've listened carefully, but I have not heard a justification yet for why we have two separate regulatory agencies governing the same kind of money, the same kind of temperaments, the same kind of attitudes, the same kinds of either investment or speculation.
Again, I do think there are functionally there are different markets. That is, that there are different. The reason why, for example, in earlier days, that people said there was somewhat of a conflict in having the CFTC as part of the Department of Agriculture. Our job is to ensure that these markets are basically, we're price neutral as an agency, that we monitor the hedging function of these contracts, and the contracts are used for very different purposes as opposed to what goes on elsewhere, what's regulated by the SEC.
Well, let me ask a question about elsewhere, and this is a pure question of fact.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any other country in the world with free markets that has two separate regulatory agencies for these two separate functions?
London, in England, the UK, for example, and actually in Japan you have separate regulators, a number of different regulators. Let me see. Let's see. Japan and UK are the ones that come to my mind. I'll get,
obviously, we're not updated, and I'd appreciate an answer to that question if it had a chance to look at it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Gordon. Senator Boschwitz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was not here for most of the testimony, having come in from Minnesota this morning, but I would like to ask you, Madam Chairman, several questions about the competition that our markets, the Board of Trade and indeed the Minneapolis Grain Exchange and others will will probably be confronted with in years to come. I wonder if you would give me, and I will ask the witnesses that are on the panel this afternoon as well, to give me an overview of what kind of markets are developing around the world, and under what kind of guidance and what kind of supervision, and what kind of a threat that poses to a continuation of the American dominance of futures markets, because it's important, in my judgment, that we not so regulate these markets as to regulate them out of existence by allowing competition to arise. Is that a legitimate fear?
I think you raised some very good question. As you know, we've had a preeminence in this country. These markets are the oldest markets in the world. There is competition. There are markets from Japan to London and France and Switzerland, Singapore, Australia, Canada. I'd say that in the financial futures area in particular, that there is increasing internationalization, that every country that wants to be an international marketplace is putting in financial futures. That's something we have at the Commission. I have participated in international regulators meetings ever since I have been at the Commission. We've had an international regulators meeting that's met for 10 years in Switzerland, and every 6 months then we host one, so that international regulators meet at least every 6 months, if not more often. Now we're now associate member of another international regulatory association. I think that the questions you raise are probably questions that I have to, it would take me a lot longer to answer as well. But again, I would point out that the Commission has a great interest in the international and international competitiveness area. And I'd also point out, just for your information, that on the House side, the House reauthorization bill asks us to do a competitiveness study of much like the one that, well, much like a lot of the questions that you ask, frankly.
I understand that there are some provisions to measure the competitive aspects of the industry that perhaps should be satisfied prior to this legislation and the impact of this legislation. There is a good deal of talk that both in London and in Tokyo that large efforts are now being made, I'm sure about Tokyo and I believe London as well, to gain a larger foothold, to gain a larger share of the markets, particularly the markets, as you say, in international financial instruments. I wonder if you would direct your attention specifically at the Japanese efforts. What are they doing, and how are they regulated by comparison?
The Japanese markets are very interesting. They are regulated. They have many regulators, as a matter of fact. They have some markets that are open outcry markets, much like ours, that are regulated by the agriculture. For example, the futures markets for agricultural products are regulated by the Ministry of Agriculture, while the Ministry of Finance regulates other kinds of futures products. More recently, the Japanese have introduced financial futures. They've been introduced. Stock index futures on the top picks and the Nikkei have been introduced since last year, and frankly have generated a lot of interest around the world.
Is the degree of regulation will after the passage of this bill, and I presume it will be passed either in its present form or in a somewhat amended form, or, in your judgment, will our exchanges be disadvantaged? Or will they still be able to compete actively, in your judgment, with the exchanges abroad? And you said earlier in answering the question that it would take a little longer, and I don't want to pursue something that takes too much of the time of this committee, but I have a great interest in that, and I want to be sure that we remain competitive. I'd rather have the wheat and soybeans and monetary instruments traded here than traded elsewhere, where I have less of a sense of security with respect to how the regulation goes. Even if I were not to have a strong sense of feeling, as I see that my former colleague, Senator Eagleton, apparently doesn't. However, I think that situation might not be improved if we regulate ourselves too assiduously.
I think that on balance, that this bill, with a few changes, is a strong and good bill that indeed would enhance and wouldn't hurt international competitive position of either of the exchanges. But there are some areas, as we pointed out in our long testimony, where we think some improvements could be made. But on balance, we feel that this is a strong bill.
I will ask, I see my time is about to expire. I want to ask about the open outcry. I want to pursue the questions that my colleague from Mississippi did about the smaller exchanges and the necessity of imposing technology on them, the costs of that technology, and what the fees to the industry. It's my understanding this bill will increase the budget of the CFTC, in the 4 years, from $40 to $66 million, if I recall the figures correctly.
That's right.
And that what percentage of those fees will be obtained from the industry?
Well, in discussion at the staff level,
just the addition?
The addition that we had estimated about $4.9 million would be what would be expected to be collected from this in-service fees as a result of this bill.
Annually.
Roughly, that's a rough.
Annually.
Annually, in addition to the other fees already collected.
I see. I see that my time has expired. I will come back to those questions, both with you, Madam Chairman, and also with the witnesses on the panels this afternoon. I thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. I want to thank all the panel members for being here, and you're excused now while we...
Oh, wait.
What?
I thought that we were going to enter into another round of questioning. In that case, I'd like to pursue my question.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were finished. No.
No, I thought that Senator Conrad might want to go.
Well, I just got here a little bit before you did. I thought Senator Conrad had already questioned the panel. I apologize, Senator Conrad.
It was my understanding that we were just going to have the one round, given the number of witnesses here. I've got lots of questions in addition, but I'd be willing to hold on those, given well, we've gotten through 2 witnesses, and I think we have 2 pages here.
Well, I'm
at your disposal. We're going to break by previous agreement, I guess, at 12:30 till 2:30.
Right.
So we have about another 25 minutes here. If it's the Senator's desires to continue questioning this panel, I certainly would not interject myself in that. If you want to, go ahead.
Can we answer some questions for the record, Senator? Would you like to submit them to us and we can respond to them?
If you
I'd be glad to do that. I tell you, I have loads of questions. I mean, I could take all day with this panel, but I don't know if that's in the interest of the committee to do that.
In that case, I'll continue, if I may.
Senator Barshwitz.
Do other exchanges in other countries impose fees on their members for the purpose of the members paying for the regulation for their own oversight?
I'll have to get that information for you. I do know that, for example, in the UK, that their some of their self-regulatory bodies, oversight bodies, are funded through fees.
Some of the, again, please, some of the oversight.
The oversight self-regulatory bodies, namely the SIB, Securities Investment Board, is funded with fees collected. But I'll get more information.
I would like, perhaps one of your colleagues there is familiar with that, but I would like to ask the CFTC or its staff to prepare for me very quickly, because this bill is moving right along, what it believes the competitive nature of our exchanges will be with the imposition of these fees. I am not particularly opposed, and I don't mean to suggest that, to these fees, but I would be most chagrined if we legislate to some of this business offshore, having a sense of the amount of activity that's created in the Middle West because of these exchanges. I believe that the two senators from the state of Illinois were here and probably testified to that. And let me, one of the things that apparently is quite a matter of dispute or whatever is the open outcry system. And Senator Eagleton, in his testimony, in the age of Globex, how can electronic trading be an historic breakthrough in Singapore and Hong Kong, but a dreaded evil in Chicago and New York? I've been at these exchanges a number of times, quite a number of times, and when you see the open outcry and there's such a tumult going on, you wonder how anybody keeps track of what's going on. But yet, as discussed here, there were billions of dollars, as Senator Eagleton pointed out, billions of dollars and millions of transactions. Hard to believe there are millions and millions of transactions, but perhaps there are. Most of those are conducted honestly, I suppose. 99 and 9/10% are conducted well and honestly. But what do you think of the necessity of the open outcry, and whether or not there is a different necessity at a smaller exchange than a larger exchange, whether or not there might be a different necessity at an exchange that trades very large contracts, perhaps oil, and is the open outcry something that is a thing of the past, or is it still a necessary element in trading these contracts?
Well, Senator, I've assiduously tried to keep from making predictions about market events that are occurring. That one of the things that we have done at the Commission is to make sure that these markets are competitive, markets are open, that they're free of fraud, and they have the kind of customer protection and integrity that the Commodity Exchange Act calls for. We have, at the Commission in just the last year and a half, looked at new technologies, including Globex screen trading type system that we believe is, at its very early stages. What we've looked at so far is satisfies the open and competitive aspect of the Commodity Exchange Act. But whenever I've been asked about whether or not I think open outcry is a thing of the past and that Globex is a thing of the future, I've always, again, outside of the context of what this particular bill does, I've always said that you often see technologies exist side by side, and that the market determines that we have seen screen trading systems that have been approved in the past, but they haven't they don't have large volumes at this point, and there are a number of screen trading systems that have not succeeded. That you know, open outcry has existed over a long period of time, and obviously must be providing some benefits. On the other hand, there are certainly a lot of new technologies and innovations that are occurring, and you know, I guess the only question, and the question that this bill raises, is, in my view, that I have some question about well, I would like to see some flexibility in the bill that would allow some flexibility for adopting systems or not adopting systems that may turn out to have greater problems or may not be practicable. They may be feasible, but may have other more serious problems, or may indeed not be practicable.
Tell me about these smaller exchanges. My colleague from Mississippi, Senator Cochran, began to explore that with you in his questions. There is talk about automation, and as I go and see my exchange in Minneapolis, where I've been many times, the pit looks a good deal different than it does in Chicago. And I've not been to Kansas City or some of the others. I have seen the statistics, so I have a sense of where the exchange in my town, how it relates to the others, at least in volume. Should there be different rules, and can a small exchange be reasonably expected to adopt these kind of automation techniques?
I think that even the small exchanges do have a fair amount of automation, but there are certain kinds of techniques that may be indeed very costly for them. That I think that the Commission has always viewed vigorous competition among the exchanges as something very positive, and has been very careful over the years that when we do rulemaking, that we establish standards but allow the exchanges to implement these standards in ways